5 weeks away from racing. A full month of Honda engineers at their Sakura facility working through every possible fix and every reason to believe Aston Martin might arrive in Florida with something resembling momentum. What actually happened was far removed from that picture. Lance Stroll locked up, spun into the runoff area, and never posted a lap time. Fernando Alonso crossed the line in 21st place, recording 1 minute 41.311 seconds, nearly 13 seconds behind Lando Norris on pole and more than 10 seconds adrift of the Cadillacs directly ahead of him. In a year already packed with low points, it felt like Aston Martin had fallen through a trapdoor in Miami. And watching those two green cars at the back of the field, it was hard to argue otherwise. Neither driver cleared the 107% time threshold that automatically grants entry to the sprint. The stewards had to step in and award them special dispensation to start, pointing to their times from the earlier practice session as justification. A team carrying the backing of a Works-Honda partnership, operating out of a brand-new Silverstone campus, built around an engineer with more championship-winning cars to his name than anyone in the history of the sport, required an official waiver just to take part in a sprint race. That is where Aston Martin find themselves, and the weight of that reality is difficult to overstate. There is something telling about the fact that the dispensation had to be granted at all. This was not a marginal miss on the cutoff. Both drivers were comfortably outside it, meaning the gap between Aston Martin and the rest of the field in Miami was not the result of a tricky setup call or an imperfect qualifying lap. It was the difference between a competitive racing car and one that could not get close enough to the standard to qualify on its own merit. The rumor that Jonathan Wheatley is heading to Silverstone as Aston Martin's new team principal has not faded since it first emerged, and Motorsport.com reports he will sign with the team. Multiple sources across the grid regard the appointment as a question of timing rather than outcome. But watching those two green cars sitting dead last in Miami sprint qualifying, the honest issue becomes whether any team principal, however decorated his record, can walk into a situation that is fundamentally a hardware problem and change where it ends up. The appointment itself is not in question from a credential standpoint. What is in question is whether a change at the top of the management structure addresses what is actually broken at Aston Martin right now. 18 years at Red Bull Racing, pit stop world records, and direct involvement in 6 World Constructors' Championships and 7 World Drivers' Championships, then a single season at Audi that turned a 4-point backmarker into a 51-point midfield competitor. His standing across the paddock rests on 3 things: operational excellence, calm crisis management when the pressure is highest, and the ability to raise a team's standards at pace. David Coulthard offered his assessment without hesitation, and his words were direct. "I know he is a fighter. He will do what he needs to do with a sporting ethic. I would have him on my team any day." In an organization as publicly unsettled as Aston Martin have looked for much of this season, that kind of paddock-wide respect carries genuine weight when it walks through the door. The reason Aston Martin won him is specific. Adrian Newey currently holds the team principal title alongside his role as managing technical partner. What the team genuinely needs is an experienced trackside boss who can front the media, run the race operation, and give Newey the room to focus entirely on the one thing that could actually shift their fortunes: designing a faster car. Wheatley fits that brief better than almost anyone currently available, and reportedly it is Newey himself who identified him as the right person for the job. On that narrow and specific brief, the appointment makes complete sense. But the situation in Miami had nothing to do with a gap in the management structure, and treating it as though it did would be misleading. Aston Martin arrived as the only team in the entire field without a single aerodynamic upgrade on their car. McLaren brought 7. While every other team on the grid spent the 5-week break advancing performance, Aston Martin spent it trying to make the car physically safe to drive. That is not a leadership failure in any straightforward sense. It is an engineering crisis, and it sits squarely inside the Honda power unit. After all the dyno work at Sakura, after all the countermeasures Honda introduced ahead of Miami, Alonso still delivered a clear picture at the microphone after sprint qualifying. His words were direct. "Yes, the vibrations have improved. We made some changes since Japan and the last few races, but what we have not touched is performance. We are still far behind the others, who have improved their cars since Japan, and we have only addressed reliability." Honda's lead engineer Shintaro Orihara had already shaped expectations before the weekend began, telling media that realistically, this progress would not have a visible impact on power unit performance on track, and that no one should expect big jumps forward at Miami. When the engine manufacturer is framing things that carefully before the cars even leave the garage, there is no quick fix on the horizon. The substantive hardware solution sits behind the next aerodynamic and development update opportunity window, a regulatory deadline that no team principal, regardless of how capable, can move forward. Wheatley can stabilize a team that has cycled through 4 different team principals in 5 years under the Aston Martin name. He can give Newey the consistent, experienced support that frees him to focus entirely on the technical recovery. He can bring the operational discipline and cultural standards he demonstrated at both Red Bull and Audi. He can be the steady, credible face of a team whose leadership picture has looked confused for much of 2026, and in doing so give the whole organization a clearer sense of direction than it has had for a while. Those things matter enormously inside an operation carrying this level of pressure. Creating the conditions where Newey is no longer being pulled in 2 directions at once could in itself accelerate the technical program the team is depending on. That is a real and meaningful outcome of the right appointment. None of that, on its own, repairs a broken power unit, and right now the power unit is the single constraint shaping everything else Aston Martin are trying to do. Strip away the management uncertainty and the confusing season, and what remains at the core of this is an engine problem that Honda engineers need to solve before the trajectory changes. Lance Stroll gave the clearest read on what to expect and when in Miami. His words were straightforward. "I still believe in this project, and it is far from reaching our true potential. If in 2 or 3 years I am sitting on the sofa and I see 2 Aston Martins at the front of the grid, and I am not there, it will bother me. 2 or 3 years. The driver at the center of this every single race weekend is not forecasting a turnaround in 2026. And when you look at the gap in Miami sprint qualifying, that timeline is genuinely difficult to challenge. Jonathan Wheatley can absolutely be part of turning Aston Martin around. His credentials for the specific role they need filled stand up against almost anyone available in the paddock right now, and the logic behind bringing him in is sound. But what unfolded in Miami sprint qualifying was not a leadership problem. It was a power unit problem. Wheatley can free Newey, steady the structure, and give the team a real platform to build from. What he cannot do is replace the Honda engineers who need to resolve this at a hardware level before any of the rest of it becomes relevant. A genuine recovery depends on all 3 things working together: operational leadership at the top of the structure, a fixed engine at the foundation, and a Newey designed car that can finally show what it is capable of. Right now, only one of those 3 is even close to being in place. The higher makes sense. The problem runs much deeper than any single appointment can reach. If you found this video useful, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Do you think a Wheatley appointment gives Aston Martin a genuine path back, or is this crisis simply beyond what any team principal change can fix? Let us know what you think.